Hello and welcome to the How to Carnivore podcast. I'm your host, Simon Lewis, and you're tuning into the Plant-Free MD series with Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Dr. Chaffee is a surgeon, nutritional researcher, and former pro rugby player. He's been strict carnivore for 3 years and an on and off carnivore for more than 20. Dr. Chaffee looks and feels like a real-life superhero. If losing fat, building muscle, finding focus, and getting the most out of life is important to you, you're going to love the Plant-Free MD series. Hey everybody, Simon here again with the How to Carnivore podcast, and we're joined with Dr. Chaffee, the Plant-Free MD, and today's topic is why humans are carnivores. So I think the best place to start, Dr. Chaffee, is something that we've talked about before, in that you can't find any nutrients in plants. I think I'll put this back to front. There are nutrients in meat that you cannot find in plants, but there are no nutrients in plants that cannot be found in meat.
That's right. Yeah, that are essential for life. Yeah. So, there are things found in meat that you have to live that are not found in plants or fungus. But there is nothing in the plant or fungi kingdom that you have that you cannot get out of meat.
Which makes
so to me that means that we're obligate carnivores. We have to eat meat. We cannot survive without the nutrients found in meat. Now you could take a supplement, but we're talking real life here. We're talking how we evolved. We're talking natural. So no one is a supplementivore. Okay, this is something that we've just made up recently, and so historically you had to eat meat in order to get these nutrients. Now we can give some supplements and so forth, and that's all well and good, but plants also have a lot of toxins, obviously, and those cause harm. So it's not as simple as just nutrients.
Yeah, for sure. So it's a hell of a lot simpler to just start with meat and use that as a foundation. And then if you want to add plants in, sure you can.
If you want to.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing that we've spoken about or sort of touched on before is fiber. Now we get hammered into us in media and by food companies that we need fiber for a healthy gut and also for bowel movements. I mean, even like there's products like Metamucil and supplements that you take, which is supplemental fiber if you're jammed up and you can't go to the bathroom. But you and I have spoken before about the damage that fiber can cause to our gut. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on fiber in the context of the human gut.
Yeah, so the human gut is not designed to deal with fiber. We've lost that ability. We had it millions of years ago, as can be seen by the fact that we have an appendix, little tiny guy, that is a vestigial organ. People grow up learning about this as kids. I certainly did. That an appendix is a vestigial organ, meaning that millions of years ago it did something, but we stopped using it, and so that ability has gone away and it's just sort of shriveled down. Well, what it used to be is a 4-foot long cecum, and that's where fiber would pack into and break down into short chain fatty acids through the specific bacteria that would be cultured there. That's what happens in chimpanzees and gorillas and other hindgut digesters. And so we don't have that ability anymore. We've lost that. So we cannot break this stuff down. And in fact, fiber can cause harm in a number of ways. First of all, it causes microabrasions to your gut lining, can increase permeability, leaky gut. It can also cause an inflammatory reaction, increased mucus secretion, and even autoimmune dysregulation. So big harm there. Another thing that it does is it blocks the absorption and breakdown of the nutrients that you actually want. So it actually gets in the way. So when you are eating a steak or even, a vegetable that has some nutrients, that fiber gets in the way. Your body can't break it down. It can't get it out of the way. So the enzymes can't get to every single nutrient and break that down. And also now that's being blocked from the villi in your small intestine from being absorbed. So you don't break it down and you don't absorb it as well. And this was an argument on why fiber is so good, is because it blocks your body from getting nutrition, and this will help you lose weight. I don't think there's any evolutionary model that exists or ever has existed that runs on the basis of limiting the amount of nutrients that you need. Most animals are starving to death and fighting for survival. So the idea of like, oh my God, no, it's just always going to be just such an abundance of energy and food source, and And so obviously you need to have developed a way to like block that out and get rid of these harmful nutrients. That doesn't make any sense to me. We don't have the ability to break down fiber. We lost that millions of years ago because we stopped eating fiber millions of years ago. This is another piece of evidence to show that we are carnivores, because we stopped eating, we were eating meat for millions of years, but we fully stopped about 2.5, 3 million years ago when the ice ages hit. And, this killed off a lot of the plants. It killed off a lot of the animals that ate the plants. Only the big woolly mammoths and bison and so forth, and their predecessors were able to dig under the permafrost and get at the grasses and so forth. These things were able to survive. And then the big predators that hunted them, including our ancestors. And if our ancestors weren't adapted to hunting these megafauna because they had been doing it already, and they had developed tools and tactics to allow them to take down a woolly mammoth, which outclassed us by every physical metric, then we wouldn't have survived. We wouldn't be here. So there's a lot of evidence for that. And fiber is a very good clue. The simple fact that we cannot break it down, we cannot absorb it, is a very good clue as to the fact that we're not herbivores, because all herbivorous animals that eat fibrous plants can break down fiber to a certain extent. That is their main nutrition source. We can't do it. And so that's very good information. There's also a study with thousands of people showing the only association with different sorts of things and colon disease. So, they always say that fiber is good for your bowels, it's good for your colon because it just moves things through. No, actually, this causes your bowel to work overtime. You're constantly pushing things through. It's constantly having to work and having to work and having to work and having to work. And eventually it fails, just like heart failure when your blood's pumping against a gradient, a high pressure gradient, and it eventually, after decades, it just wears out. The same thing happens with your colon. If you're just eating so much fiber, it can do this as well. So the only things associated with an increased correlation with diverticulosis, which is outpouching of your distal colon, the last part of your colon right before your rectum, were increased fiber intake, increased number of bowel motions a day. Those are the only two things that you had an association. Say that again?
If we can just rewind a little bit. So the what's the condition that you're talking about that's caused by the fiber?
Diverticulosis. So diverticulosis is an outpouching of your distal colon, and that can cause problems because you can get bits of food and so forth stuck in that, and it can get infected, and you have quite a big problem. You can fix that with just antibiotics. Sometimes people need surgery to resect that, and it's a very serious condition.
Outpouching, do you mean that it's come outside your body, or what's actually happening there?
No, just on the tube itself. So you have this tube here, and they just basically blow bubbles on the surface.
Right. Okay.
And so it outpouches on the colon itself. Mm-hmm. And so they're called diverticulae. So it's just like it's sort of like if you think of like a hernia where like tissue sort of pushing through your abdominal wall. Same idea. This thing's just sort of this bubble sort of erupted off the top of that, and so now food can go through the lumen of the intestine and sort of sit in that little pouch and rot there and become a problem and can cause damage and become infected. So, and this is another thing. Whenever you get diverticulosis or you have bowel surgery or something like that, bowel surgeons put people on a low residue diet to rest the bowel. So they put them on a very low fiber diet and say, oh, you got to get rid of that fiber. Don't eat seeds, don't eat nuts, don't eat anything like that, because this stuff can get caught in there to make it worse, and this will be a problem. And then as soon as it's done, like, well, better eat a high fiber diet to take care of that, bad colon of yours. It's like, where were you yesterday when you were telling me to do the exact opposite? Oh, you have these hard stools, and that's going to make it harder for you to pass. And then that will cause that organ to fail. Need more fiber. Let's push it through and it won't be a problem. No, actually, it's the opposite. So these were all guesses. There's a lot of things in medicine that were just guesses or based on pretty faulty information or even fraudulent information, which years later we look back on and go like, nope, that's wrong. And that gets changed all the time. So nothing's set in stone, really. I mean, there are some things that are just like, we have just a ton of evidence to show this, but everything's up for grabs. And especially these sorts of things where we've just made a guess. We just made an educated guess based on limited information, and we haven't really done the studies. So studies were done for this, and it's showing that no, it's exactly the opposite. And so increased meat, increased fat, increased protein, constipation, did not contribute, were not even associated as risk factors, had no correlation, with an increased level of diverticulosis. Only fiber, only increased bowel motion. So fiber is not good for you. This causes problems in your gut as opposed to being good for your gut.
It's funny that that fiber is causing constipation, yet there's all those products out there like Metamucil that basically you take that, it completely expands in your system. And then you do need to go to the bathroom, but it's kind of like, you're adding more poison to sort of get this result that releases it.
Yeah, well, you're also adding bulk. You're adding bulk to your system because so the problem with constipation, you have to dry this stuff out. So they said if you eat fiber, it'll increase the motility of your gut, and your gut will be able to move this stuff faster, which has never been proven. That's just something that they say. And so this will move it through your gut, before it can dry out in your colon. Why are you fighting your colon here? Your colon's supposed to draw water out. That's its job, is conserving moisture. So you think that you have to micromanage that and actually do something that counteracts that organ's entire job? You might be on the wrong side here. And so in fact, it's, as I've discussed before with you and on other videos, it's actually fat that drives your digestion. It's actually fat that keeps your bowel motion soft. And so it's that excess, we can only absorb a certain amount of fat until we run out of bile. Then it's very difficult for us to absorb fat. And that excess fat that we don't absorb gets into your stool. And that's what keeps it soft, because oil repels water. So your stool is already going to be as dry as it's going to get, because it's completely desiccated anyway, or nearly as such. And, it can sit in your colon until Christmas. It's never going to get, fat's never going to get drier than it already is. And it's already soft. So it's going to stay soft. So it doesn't matter if you get rid of all the water, if you're eating enough fat and you have a bit of fat excess. And that's how you know how much fat you're getting on a carnivore diet. If you're constipated, you need to eat more fat. If you're having loose stools, you need to pull that back. And obviously if you're eating, different sorts of things like, drinking coffee or having artificial sweeteners, and certainly the sugar alcohols like sorbitol and xylitol, and those absolutely cause diarrhea and loose stools. Assuming that you don't do any of that, assuming that you only do meat and water like I do, and you're having loose stools, just pull back on your fat. And so the fiber isn't actually helping there. You can actually get problems because you're increasing that bulk to such a degree that now you have this big block of wood and it gets dried out and gets stuck, because a lot of elderly people have low gut motility anyway. They have neurogenic colons. And so it's just going to slow down anyway. If they were eating fat, that wouldn't matter. But they're eating a bunch of fiber and low fat. And so they have big problems. They get a lot of bowel obstructions and so forth. They have very painful motions, and they are, get impacted and so forth. And they have to, get that treated. And it's not a pleasant treatment. Sometimes you have to do it manually. I have to do a manual disimpaction. I unfortunately had to do that in my second year as a doctor in the emergency department. And this poor lady was just in so much pain. And I did an exam, and it was just rock hard. It was there. And it was just like, okay, this is what we got to do. And normally you try to take off a little chunk. This wouldn't. So I tried to get this out. It came out in a whole one big chunk. It was probably that big, so I don't know, 600 ml of just rock hard stool, and some blood definitely came out. And afterwards it was like, she was just my biggest fan ever. She was, oh my God, thank you so much, because you're in so much pain, you're in so much distress. When you have a tube in your body blocked, like your bowels or your bladder, is
horrible,
significantly painful. I've never had anyone thank me more in my entire career than when I've put in a catheter, urinary catheter, for someone who's in acute retention, or that lady that we got unstuck, or someone who we're able to treat them medically and give them medications to clear that out. People are so thankful, because you're in so much pain, because your body's telling you this is about to explode. And if this explodes, you're dead. And so that's a big signal to your body to stop whatever the hell it is you're doing.
So she was all jammed up from eating too many fibrous plants, and and not enough fat in her diet. So it's kind of like this sort of forming like this rock of
exactly
plant matter, basically.
It's
growing and growing.
Yeah, it's wood, isn't it? I mean, fiber is cellulose, right? So I mean, that's what wood is. And so when they're increasing the amount of fiber in food, they actually add sawdust. That's a real thing. And so there are dozens and dozens and dozens, probably hundreds or even thousands of processed food products that add sawdust in order to increase fiber, because now fiber has been officially recognized as an essential nutrient. You have to have it or you'll die. That's what essential means.
Is it actually a nutrient? Can you classify it as a nutrient?
Well, I mean, they can classify anything as anything. It doesn't mean that it's real. No, it's not a nutrient. It's certainly not essential. And so, but they have classified it as an essential nutrient. An essential nutrient means that if you don't get enough of this, you'll have a deficiency and you can die. Okay. Like, some, various vitamins and the different deficiencies and the diseases that you get from that, beriberi, scurvy, all these sorts of things. And so, saying that someone that, is an acute deprivation of fiber, I've never actually heard that. I've never actually heard what condition that would cause. I certainly haven't run across it myself.
Zero constipation, maybe.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I don't know. It's just, it's a very strange thing that they would have done, but because they've done that, and because it's a buzzword, and because it's a marketing tool, everybody wants fiber. You have to be eating more fiber, more fiber. Yeah. So they add fiber, and it's sawdust. There's another thing too. Movicol is something we use as a stool softener and a laxative, and you can get people unstuck by giving them a bunch of this stuff. This stuff actually has been shown to cause leaky gut. This is not good, so you're giving this to someone to help their digestion. You're actually ruining it. So you get leaky gut, which, you have these tight bindings between the cells in your gut, and it actually breaks those. So now the cells are physically not touching like they would. Now you're talking nanometers here wide, but normally they're stuck by these tight junctions, and they're stuck there. And so molecules past a certain size can't pass through them. Generally, you have to, there's different charges and different sorts of ways of keeping this barrier protection in your gut. But once you unstick those and you break those tight bindings, now it's flapping loose, and things can literally just penetrate into your body, and they do. And this is why you get, lectins are a big problem here. Gluten, weak gluten, even people that aren't celiac, the gluten can cause leaky gut and can break these junctions between the cells, and now you can get these things sucking into your body, like lectins, which then cause havoc in your body. There's a ton of different kinds of lectins, but quite a lot to go into for this episode, but they can cause a myriad of problems. They can emulate insulin. They can hit on your insulin receptors. They can increase peripheral insulin resistance, which increases adiposity and fat deposition. It can cause autoimmune disorders and cause all sorts of different problems. So nasty stuff. And we're giving people Movicol, which actually exacerbates these problems in the first place. So
is that generally
we're doing things very backwards here?
Yeah. Is that generally in like a hospital treatment, like extreme cases, or is that something that a lot of people are taking?
A lot of people are taking this. You can get this over the counter, but we do use it in hospital all the time. We'll put people on Movicol when we're putting them on opiates or something like that, or they just haven't, been opening their bowels or something like that. And yeah, so it's very, very common. It's one of the most common stool softeners that we use in the hospital. I always think, because we do surgery on people, and quite often, we can't, especially if you're doing spinal surgery, we can't let them go until they open their bowels. And, I was just thinking, I was like, if I ever have to get this kind of surgery, they're not going to let me out for a week because I just don't go. So it's not going to be like anything's wrong, but because, I eat a carnivorous diet, I don't have all this excess waste that my body's trying to get rid of. And so I absorb 99% of the food that I eat. And so I don't have waste that accumulates to such a degree. And so it's like, once a week, maybe have to do this, and they won't let me move. They'll probably try to stuff down a bunch of laxatives down my throat, which I won't take. And we're just going to have a standoff, but yeah.
To be a fly on the wall if that ever happens.
Yeah, that'd be funny. They would get a few lectures about life, medicine in general, how the body works.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's when you're on strict carnivore, not needing to do a number 2 is a pretty weird experience. I remember going through that and thinking, I haven't taken a crap for 2 or 3 days. And then when I did, it was like a rabbit. Which is the opposite to, you imagine a vegan going like 3 or 4 times a day, and doing, really often really hard, I imagine. All right, probably enough stool and number 2 chat. What about the acidity level in our stomachs? How does that kind of suggest that we're carnivores?
Yeah, so you can look at the whole digestion from teeth all the way down, and we have these carnivorous adaptations. Always remember we are primates, and so we have a lot of things to do with our primate heritage. And so we're not going to have 4 stomachs like a cow, and we're not going to have big teeth like a feline. We're just not. So, or different teeth also, for different reasons as well. But we are primates first and foremost with carnivorous adaptations. So, to do with our stomach, as you mentioned, our pH is extremely low. It's one of the lowest in nature. So it's like 1.5, 1.8 pH, which is extremely acidic. Okay. 7 is about neutral, right? And then like 14 is super basic. And then, 0 is, as absolute acidic as you can get, which you can't get really. And so we're at 1.5, 1.8. And that's sort of the pH that you would see in like vultures and other carrion animals. They're eating diseased, toxic, broken down meat that's rotting, and so they need to be able to kill off this horrible bacteria in their stomach acid. So we actually have that, and we can. And this is actually why people like Dr. H Salisbury would say you shouldn't drink water for 2 hours before or 2 hours after you eat a meal, because you're going to water down your stomach acid, and it's going to make it less, the pH go up, which means you're not going to be able to break down your food as readily, and you won't get as much out of it.
Have you tried that?
Say that again.
Have you tried that?
I've never been as strict as that.
Yeah.
And, but I'm so used to, when we grow up, like that's when we drink a lot of water, is when we at the dinner table. My parents would always, okay, drink enough water, drink enough water, drink water. Does everyone want water? Do you want more water? And we're just drinking water all the time. Never really thought about it. So when I start eating, I naturally want water, but I try to limit it. And I do try to eat water at other times, but I end up drinking water around that time. But I have noticed a difference when, the more I do that, I tend to excrete less waste, meaning that I'm breaking down things better, I'm absorbing things better. And I haven't really thought about it enough to see how it made me feel in general. I think I'm still feeling pretty good, but you're likely to be able to break these things down better and absorb them better if you do that. And that's certainly what Salisbury pointed out. And it would make sense as well, given the fact that, we're going to be raising our pH if we drink a bunch of water. And it's something I want to try, actually. I do want to try that for a few weeks and just see how I go.
Yeah, I'm curious to experiment with that. Now that you mentioned that, I've never heard this before. Now that you mentioned that, I'm sort of thinking of being in a restaurant, and often in a restaurant, your water glass is constantly being filled up. And then when you eat, you kind of are eating, and you can tell there's a lot of water and liquid in your gut. So I'm going to give that a go.
It's worth trying out. And Salisbury also says, well, you should be drinking like either warm water or at least room temperature water as well, and that can help also. But either way, I think that the timing of it, I think, would make a big difference just because of the pH. Other sort of adaptations that we have are that our small intestine is actually quite long in comparison to the rest of our gut, and this is where most of the the meat and the fat is getting broken down and absorbed in this area. And then a bit of waste is getting into our colon and then just basically drying out. We don't really absorb anything in our colon, as opposed to gorillas and chimpanzees and other herbivorous primates. And there are carnivorous primates as well, apart from humans. But The herbivorous ones are called hind gut digesters. They do most of their digestion, breakdown, and absorption in their hind gut, in their lower intestine. And so that's the opposite with us. You know, we have a smaller large intestine, colon. They have a longer one, and they have this long cecum. So we don't have those changes anymore. This is very different anatomy compared to herbivorous primates. And you look at the carnivorous primates as well, they have a gut more similar to ours as well. They don't have the big long colon where they would be able to, or a cecum where they would be able to break down fiber. They have a longer small intestine and so forth, and, you know, slightly lower pH. Generally with herbivores, you would see a much higher pH, much closer to neutral in their stomach acid as well. And you see carnivores have lower pH, and you see the scavengers like vultures and things like that have the lowest of all. And we had that. And the idea behind that is that for millions of years, like, we're not hunting much with that, especially when we were like 3 foot tall, you know? And so we had to be carrion animals. And so we were scavenging around and eating the leavings of, you know, lions and what have you at the time. And then we developed, you know, figured out that we could use a rock to crack open a skull, and we could get the brains super high nutrients. And that was a big food source. And then we started figuring out tools, started using these tools more and more and more. I was using for pound stones for millions of years, probably. There's fossil records that show that. I don't know why it took so long to figure out how to then break this thing, to give it a sharp point, to then use that as a cutting implement. But literally millions of years. But, you know, evolution moves very slowly. And so eventually we developed tools and increased our intellect as well subsequently. But we started out as scavengers, and we started out having to eat the sometimes rotten leavings of other more adapted predators that could just take down large animals fairly easily, which we really couldn't.
I think that still happens today. I saw a video on YouTube where it was like a lion had made a kill, and then a group of Maasai tribesmen turned up with their spears, and they just shooed the lion away. And then I think it was a zebra, and the zebra's theirs.
Yeah, I saw that with cheetahs as well. Same idea. And these guys, they were fearless. And they just had this stick, and they just start smacking this cheetah in the face. And they were like, while one guy's dragging it away, and the cheetahs are freaking out. One guy's just smacking it in the face with this switch. And it's just like, you know, it's getting back, and it's getting really aggressive, and it's like trying to fight for its food, but it gets smacked in the face and doesn't know what's happening. they just walk off with this little antelope.
Yeah, we'll take that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that absolutely still happens. But I think for a while there, before we figured out tools and so forth, we weren't pulling too much away from a lion. And but yeah, we get the leavings. But yeah, you're right, that is something that you see. And yeah, they use other more capable predators,
for sure,
to take down an animal, and then they just poach it away.
Yeah. Actually, another thing that I saw today was it was talking about these Viking explorers in like the year 1200, and I think they'd gone from Greenland and then sailed across to North America. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think so. And they set up this camp, and it was right next to a rotting whale carcass. And basically they survived through the entire winter because there was a whole whale's body right there on the beach. So I know that doesn't sound very appealing, but this is kind of in line with what you're saying about the low pH, high acidic stomach, where, we can handle these sorts of eating meat and fat that might be kind of close to rotting, and then we can be opportunistic feeders.
Yeah. And think about how many cultures have a version of rotten ass meat. Norwegians have rotfisk. I think it just means rotten fish.
Really?
And yeah, they do. And they would pack these in big barrels, and and put salt and things like that, big layer of meat, salt, stuff like that, or do that with beef as well. And this would preserve it. And this is what they'd use in their long voyages. They just ate meat. They did not get scurvy, and that's why they didn't get scurvy, is because they weren't eating a bunch of carbs and grains and porridge and so forth. they were eating meat. And so that's why they didn't have to worry about that. But yeah, you're right. No, it was, I think it was Leif Erikson made it to North America.
Yeah, mate, your history knowledge is pretty sharp. Yes, that was the name, Ericsson, that was in the video.
Yeah. And that was like 1100 and something. I don't know, 60 something. But yeah, it was right around that time. I hadn't heard the whale story though. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, and obviously I'm sure they'd be adapted at hunting and fishing and so forth as well. But like if you're just eating a whale, just keep eating that thing. And
it's right there. It's easy.
Yeah, exactly. And it's probably freezing cold, so it's probably not really spoiling that fast. And that's another example of this I didn't even think about. The movie Alive, it was based on the book about a team of rugby players from South America who crashed in the Andes, and they survived for like 9 months, close to a year, by eating the bodies of the people that died in the crash. Very harrowing story, very, very
confronting,
insane sort of circumstance you'd have to be in and have to turn to cannibalism and so forth. But they lived for 9 months.
Yeah, that's true. They were just eating meat, human meat.
Yeah, and so you're talking about like, no, you'd get scurvy. Would you? They didn't. They were up in the mountains in the snow, and they did just fine. So, and for 9 months, I think it was 9 months. So that's another sort of example. And also because it was in the snow and these people just packed in there, they never went bad because it was their own ice chest. So that probably was what happened with that whale as well. But yeah, you're right. And that's a good example of that even if this thing is slightly rotten and so forth, and they do have rotten fish, the Inuits and so forth, they take fish heads and they sort of pack them in a jar and just bury them under the house, and they rot, and they take them out 6 months later, and apparently they just smell horrendous. And you either really love them or you really, really, really hate them. I was watching a show on this, and they were mentioning this, and it was a husband and wife, and they were both of Native Alaskan descent, and the wife loved these things, just loved them. And so she would always have like a jar going, and then when the husband would find it, he would just break it and throw it away and not get rid of it because it was so disgusting. But she would always have these things stashed, and every now and then they'd be ready to go, and she would just have them, and he like wouldn't let her in the house for like several days, like after she'd eat them, because she just reeked of this rotting meat. And that's something we do. That's why we have spices as well. That's why the spice trade was such a huge industry for so long. That was to preserve and cover the taste of rotting meat, because you had to eat meat. Meat was very important. It was the staple diet, and everyone knew this up until about 1977, when they got told otherwise. And so you put on a bunch of spices and so forth to cover this up. And you think about where spices were most prevalent, or generally in the sub-Asian continent, like India, Southern Asia, and so forth, where you have you're in this tropical weather. Meat's not going to last very long. You're not going to have a cold shed. You're not going to have, or a cold cellar like you would in the north, where you can cut a big block of ice out of the lake and just put that in your cellar, and you'd have a cold room, and that would actually keep that cold and cool throughout the year. It wouldn't be as good as a refrigerator, but it would do a good job. They didn't have that, and so they had to do other things and cover up the taste of rotting meat, because you needed to eat the meat, and because that meat was life.
Interesting. Yeah, the spice trade. All right, how about our teeth? Are our teeth made for eating plants, meat, or both?
Yeah, so again, we have primate teeth, but again, with carnivorous adaptations. You look about 8 million years ago, when our ancestors split off from other primates. We did so because we started eating more and more meat, and had more and more adaptations until we hit our current iteration. So then we had larger teeth and larger jaws and larger muscles of mastication. You can look at skulls, and the brain is actually smaller, and they have this big ridge that comes over the back, and that's where these big muscles attach, so that you could chew, because you're chewing hard, tough things like leaves and sticks all day. And so you need these big muscles, you need these big jaws, and big teeth as well, because they'll wear down, and we don't regrow our teeth like a rat would or a shark would. And so when you run out of teeth, you're not really eating too much. So our teeth became smaller and smaller. Our jaws became smaller and smaller. Our muscles of mastication and temporalis muscle became smaller and smaller because we're eating softer and softer food. Meat and fat are very, very soft. We're not chewing on sticks all day like a gorilla, who needs big teeth. People say like, well, we don't have fangs and canines like a canine. And it's like, right, well, we don't kill things with our mouths. We couldn't kill things physically except, small animals and whatever. And then we went after carrion. And so we had to develop tools and tactics in order to take down, a mastodon. And so we developed our brains, our intellect came to bear, and we developed tools and tactics. And that's why we live in houses, and lions and gorillas don't, because they have the physical attributes to allow them to get their preferred and optimal diet. People say like, well, we don't have claws that are designed to kill an antelope, but we have a hand that could just pick fruit easily. Right. And so since it's easy, you don't really need much brain power to do it. And so we wouldn't have developed a big, powerful brain just for picking fruit that any idiot can do. So that's not going to be an evolutionary driver to grow a big brain, which takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of time. And so evolution isn't going to waste its time developing a brain for nothing. We don't develop traits and we don't lose traits unless there's a survival advantage to it. And, it doesn't take much brain power to hunt a lettuce, but you do need a lot of brain power to figure out how to take down a woolly mammoth when this is what you're working with, teeth again. So teeth, we don't have big fangs and so forth because that's not what we use them for.
It's not our weapon.
No, exactly. And so, but then you look at gorillas, they have big old canines, big fangs. They don't need any meat. They don't use that to hunt. So that argument's out the window. That's just stupid. You have plenty of herbivores with big fangs, and you have carnivores that don't have fangs. Okay, so fangs don't equal carnivore.
Okay, yeah.
And people look at that do picture very simplistic arguments. Generally, these arguments saying that we're herbivores and so forth, and they'll look at your teeth. And like just a picture of people's teeth, the front of their teeth, and a picture of animals with their mouths open and so forth. And you're like, oh, look at a hyena and a lion; these like big pointy teeth and so forth, and always these fangs. You look at a horse and a cow; it's just flat in the front, and we have flat in the front. We have flat teeth. No, that's not what flat teeth mean. Flat teeth means that they're planar on a three-dimensional surface. So like the surface where your teeth would,
like grind back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. They would be able to sweep back and forth like a millstone. Yeah, where we're going like this. And so, we can move our jaws, right? I say, oh, only herbivores can do that. But clench your teeth and try and move your jaw. It doesn't go anywhere because we actually have bicuspid teeth. We don't have flat teeth. Okay, so they get stuck there. So we're not able to mill down grain and grasses and so forth like other animals would. We still have that adaptation because we used to be herbivores. We used to do that. We used to need to do that. But again, evolution isn't going to develop a trait or lose a trait unless there's an evolutionary advantage to it. So there obviously just wasn't any advantage to losing the ability to move our jaw side to side. Okay. I wouldn't think that there would be, but we know that there really wasn't one because it didn't happen. We can still move our jaws. And that was just an ability that we already had, and it didn't benefit us to lose it. And so we didn't lose it, but our teeth are very different. They aren't flat, and they can't process and mill fiber like a cow's teeth can or a horse's teeth. So they have flat teeth. We don't have flat teeth. And so there's a number of different things you could look at to know that our teeth are adapted for a carnivorous diet, and certainly not for an herbivorous high fiber diet.
Okay, interesting. I want to talk about something that we spoke about just before the chat. And that was the difference between a horse's stomach and a cow's stomach. And I never really kind of put two and two together before, but when you see a horse's crap, it kind of looks like you can see the vegetation in it. It looks like the compost bin or like the grass clippings from the lawnmower is what it looks like. Whereas a cow is like brown and smooth and so processed that you can't tell that it was once grass. These are two big hairy animals that both eat grass. How come, I'm guessing this is something to do with the process that's going on inside with them actually digesting or getting nutrients from the grass. What's going on here?
Yeah. So, cows are just much more efficient at getting energy out of fibrous plants and grass than a horse is. I'm just from memory, I think that a horse can only get about 20% of the nutrients out of fiber from the grass that they eat, whereas a cow gets like 80%.
Wow.
Or possibly even more. And that's because they have this 4-barreled stomach, and they regurgitate that up, chew the cud, break it down again. They have this big, long breakdown process that is able to break it down further, and they can get more energy out of that. A horse just has to eat more. It just has to eat more. It has to eat more in order to maintain the calories that they need. This is actually it's another historical sort of fact. Why Genghis Khan and the Mongol horde, who were carnivores, they were completely meat based. They ate horse meat. They drank horse blood, and they were on average 6'4" on average. Adult male was 6'4". I'm 6'3", so I'd be below average for the little we think like Mongolians as little Asian dudes, but no, they were very large men on very small horses, and they just ate horse meat. And
were they sort of farming the horses, like they're riding the horses, but then they've also got this kind of like flock of horses as well?
Yeah, I mean, these things are just breeding all the time. I'm sure they had surpluses as well. I'm sure that they had certain ones bred for riding and so forth that maybe they probably didn't eat, but they also did bloodletting as well. So if they were on like a long journey or whatever, they would actually let blood from the horse, and they'd put it in a container or whatever, and they would drink it. Amazing. And so that they would drink horse blood as well. And so this is why they could go. So the Mongols had the largest contiguous empire that's ever existed. And it's actually where Russia is now. That's part of the old Mongol Empire, because actually, when there was a cataclysm of some form, we don't know exactly what, but maybe a volcano, maybe an asteroid, something hit, blew up a big bunch of dust and plume into the atmosphere for several years. This blocked out the UV. This blocked out the sun's energy and rays. It killed a lot of the vegetation, killed a lot of the grasses, and tons of animals died as well. This is, for some reason, what Bill Gates is trying to do. He just did an experiment, I think in Sweden, where they shot up a bunch of particulates to try to block out the dangerous energy from the sun. It's like, buddy, we only exist because of the energy.
It needs to stop interfering and let nature
that's
do
it. It's the you have a complex system, and you mess with it, you are going to have, it's a law of unintended results. You mess with a complex system, you have no way of predicting.
It's so dumb. It's like introducing the cane toads to kill the locusts, which is what we did here in Australia. And now we've got this like cane toad swarm that in 2022 we can't control. Look, block out the sun, it's going to be a worse outcome than just cane toads.
That's it. The cure is worse than the disease.
Oh, man.
But this one's not too hard to figure out. I mean, the guy's smart enough. Bill Gates is not a dumb man. And we literally made, I think Highlander 2 was actually about this. It was like in the future, and there was like, the danger from the sun, and we had to block it out to block out the UV light. And then it was just like, it was horrible. It was just all dark and it was rainy. It was terrible. And it was this horrible landscape. They're like, oh, we really messed up. It's like, the Matrix is like that. They scorched the sun, they scorched the sky so that the sun's energy couldn't come in, and then they had to farm people and so forth. So this is bad. This comes out bad. All the major extinctions that we know about are generally from one of these cataclysmic events where the sun's energy gets blocked out, and it just destroys life on Earth, just completely destroys it. And you have these mass extinctions. Every single one of these things causes a mass extinction. And he's literally trying to do this intentionally, which is crazy to me. And I mean, that's like Bond villain level crazy.
Yeah.
And so something like that happened to the Mongol horde. And so something hit about that time, kicked up a bunch of dust, And for years, it killed off a lot of the grasses and a lot of the vegetation. And because horses were much less efficient at getting the energy from grasses, they need a lot more grasses. They weren't able to survive. And so they weren't able to maintain their herds, and their empire died out, or at least regressed significantly into what is now modern day Mongolia. This is where Russia came from, because they had basically their slave population there, or at least underclass population, were herding cows, and they were cow-based society. And so they actually were able to survive and thrive because of the cows, and because the cows were much more efficient at it. And so they ended up taking over. That's where Russia is now, because that's a big chunk of the Mongol Empire. The Mongol Empire stretched from nearly the Atlantic Ocean in France and to nearly all of Asia. Is absolutely massive. You look at it on a map sometime, it is massive. It's the largest it's the largest empire that has ever existed. Pure carnivores. People say, it's like, you can't have a civilization without agriculture, without farming, and so forth. Largest civilization that's ever existed on Earth was purely carnivorous, and it was 900 years ago. And you look at the Native Americans in North America, they were just eating meat. They were just eating, predominantly buffalo. They had cities in St. Louis, what is now St. Louis. They found, obviously abandoned, because there was some plague that killed off like 95% of the Native Americans in the sort of early to mid 1600s, just before the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock, and I think it was at 1642 or 1646 or something like that. Anyway, there was some sort of mass extinction of the Native Americans just before that, and all of a sudden people started kind of going west a bit, like, what's going on? What's going on? There's no one here. What's going on? And they started going out and exploring, and they found settlements. They found cities that were just gone. There was no one there. In St. Louis, they found buildings and structures and all these sorts of things that they estimated could house 1 million full-time residents in St. Louis. And they had, 5 different massive trade routes that were just beaten into the ground, because there's so much traffic going up and down, up to the Great Lakes, out to, out west, down, south and east, and all these sorts of things, major trade routes. And they all came here. And even years, even decades after no one had used these things, they were still beaten into the ground, because they're so highly trafficked. But 1 million people, full-time residents in what is now St. Louis, fully carnivore. So get back to horses, they just aren't as efficient. But that's some interesting tie-ins with historical carnivores as well.
It is a good reminder about how efficient and amazing cows are, because they can survive in really hardy environments. You could have a cow living on a nature strip in between a highway. And I think that's something that's totally been forgotten, that, in an ideal society, you really could have cows everywhere, and the cows are providing you with meat, and they're providing you with milk, and they're living off what, we might consider scrub or weeds or whatever. And then they're producing something that's highly, highly nutritious, perfect food for humans. And you don't have to store it when it's on their body. They're just walking around doing their thing.
Yeah, and and the thing is too, they can survive on more than that. When I was in Bangladesh, doing humanitarian work in the refugee camps there, we saw cows that were sort of all over the place, because they did eat meat there. It wasn't like India, where most people are vegetarian. They ate a lot of meat there, and when they could get it, they were very, very poor. But there were cows. You see cows around. These things did not eat grass. These things, I called them trash cows, because they were literally eating trash. I thought because they didn't have any trash removal services in Bangladesh, so they just throw trash on the sidewalk. They just throw trash on the ground, and a lot of the stuff was processed food. Had like Ruffles chips and things like that, which is crazy. I mean, these people are dirt poor, and yet these predatory food companies are coming in and saying, "Oh, here, buy our chips." It's like, the food that they can just get locally is going to be a hell of a lot less expensive and a hell of a lot more nutritious. Like, you guys are really taking advantage of people who are really, really, really not well off. And I think that that's a pretty nasty, practice. But in any case, they do buy this, and they have a lot of this stuff there. And so they have a lot of plastic bags. You go through places, they're just jungles. It's just jungles, and these little villages and this road that goes through a central market, and everyone's just milling around, and these little stores that are like built out of like bamboo and so forth, and they just have stacks of hanging plastic bags of treats and things like that in the middle of the jungle. It's surreal. And so they throw this stuff out because they don't have anywhere to dispose of it properly, because they never used this stuff before. Everything that they had before would biodegrade, or they'd use for fuel to burn. And this stuff they couldn't, so they just throw it on the ground. And I thought that the cows were sort of eating in the trash. I thought they were sort of moving it out of the way to get to the like little nubbins of grass that were underneath it. So I'm like, okay, but it didn't really look around. I'm like, okay. Then when we were going through this little area, there was a bin, sort of a large concrete container. There were 20 cows all in this thing, just eating the trash. There was no grass. There was concrete floor. And this is where people would throw all their trash. There's 15, 20 cows all in there, just eating the trash and trying to get this hyper palatable food and little leavings. And I was like, that is crazy. So we call them trash cows. I took a ton of pictures of these things. I should probably put them up on Instagram.
Yeah.
And I might have put some of them on Instagram. Some of my Bangladesh pictures that's why I started Instagram, was just people kept asking me about my trip to Bangladesh. So I put some of the pictures, some of the more easily digestible ones, because some of these things are really, really tragic that you just wouldn't want to see. But I think I would have put the trash cows up. If not, I will. Yeah. And so they can eat trash and you're just fine. And then, but you're right. They don't have to be in a field. You don't have to clear a field and just grow grass. They evolved in these big grassy fields, and that's actually what made them very, fertile and so forth. These big grassy plains that came through, North America and so forth. But you don't need to. You can run them through rangeland. You can run them through forest, which is the predominant type of land that we have on Earth. There's only 4% of the Earth's surface, including the oceans, obviously, is arable land where you can have a farm. Or a city, because that's the thing. Farms and cities compete for space, and only 4% of the world's surface is arable land. But I think forest is like 10 or 15%, and then rangeland is like 10 or 15%. One of them is 10, one of them is 15%. I forget which one's which. But these are things. So that's 25% of the Earth's surface, roughly, that is not suitable for cities, not suitable for farms. Is suitable for cows, suitable for goats, is suitable for sheep.
Well, I think the biggest farm in the world is in Australia. I think it's like owned by the Kidman family, and it's like as big as a state. There's like millions of square kilometers, and the cows roam, and you see footage of them, and they're in the desert, and you think, well, what are they eating? But they're crossing a lot of land, and they're finding little shrubs and all sorts of things to eat. And and we see the Maasai with their cows in Africa, in Tanzania and Kenya. There's not like open plains of just perfect green grass. It's it's an arduous environment, yet these cows are still able to find the nutrients they need.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what people like Allan Savoury has been doing, where he's taking large herds of animal out through Zimbabwe and around the world, because he's been doing this for 40 years. And I saw some clown vegan activist doctor guy who I think is just very, very misinformed of his own volition. I think he works very, very hard to be as misinformed as possible to fit his ideology. But he was talking about Allan Savoury, and this guy makes these big claims and then doesn't back them up. He just states this statement like it's irrefutable proof. But he was basically making a statement that Savoury was doing that, saying that people that have Galileo syndrome, where they just think they just know everything and no one else does, and they've got the answer to everything. They compare themselves to Galileo and so forth, and they make these grandiose proclamations, such as that appropriate livestock farming and management can reverse global warming. And so he says that Allan Savoury has Galileo syndrome. Well, I mean, first of all, you have to show me where exactly he said those words specifically, Chief. And second of all, show me why he's wrong. Okay. Because first of all, I've never heard Allan Savoury say that, but he's been doing this for 40 years and he's been getting reproducible results from himself and from other people who learn his techniques. They do the exact same things. They have the exact same things happen. When you have that reproducibility in a study or a trial or in practice, you know that you're onto something. Okay. So what Savoury is doing is he's taking large herds of animal like you would see in the wild, bunched and moving. So they're not just sitting there, just eating down the grass to nothing. They're just eating it down most of the way, and then they move on because they're defecating and urinating on their food source. And so they have to keep moving, have to keep moving, and to find palatable bits of grass and so forth. So they have to keep moving. This is very beneficial to the soil. This is very beneficial to the grasses and the plants, as it turns out. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think people should, I'd encourage them to go watch Allan Savoury's work and Peter Ballerstedt's work. That guy's brilliant. He's a PhD in forest agronomy. He does a lot of work in this area. There's a lot of very interesting, hard science, fact-based talks on this exact subject. But so Allan Savoury is reversing deserts. He's getting these things through deserts. And he said to people, they drive through some desert area, and he said, I'll give you 10 pounds if you find one blade of grass in the next 100 miles or so, And so they would just run these cows through, and they just find a little bit, but they do a lot of different things. Their hooves dig in, and it sort of changes the ground. So instead, when it rains, the water doesn't just run off. It actually pools and settles and soaks in, as opposed to just running off and washing off all the seeds and washing off the topsoil. Okay. It settles in. Now it increases the amount of groundwater that there is. They're eating down a bit, they're defecating, they're urinating, they're fertilizing the soil, they're moving seeds around. All of a sudden, plants start growing again. It's a more fertile environment. It's a more habitable environment for plants. And then when plants come back, animals come back, and it's this symbiosis, and it gets better and better and better. And so he has these areas where you look at this farm next to this farm, there's a little fence in the middle, both just barren deserts. And then after a number of years of doing this, all of a sudden one is just green, full of grass and trees and bushes. The other side is still a barren wasteland.
Incredible.
And this is tightening up the water supply. Like he has a property in Zimbabwe, and he's been doing this around there. It's just this verdant paradise now, and other places aren't. And so the waterways that go through there, this starts bounding the streams and so forth, makes it better, so it doesn't just evaporate and dissolve away. So these other places that aren't year-round water supplies, it's sort of, there's water there in the rainy season, and then it goes away because it's not able to maintain that. His are. So he has year-round water going through his property, specifically because he does this. And then it goes off his property, it goes and it just dissipates and goes away. And so, this is something that we saw in Yosemite when they reintroduced wolves. All of a sudden now the deer had to act very differently. They couldn't just sit out, just chewing down, the grass and so forth, beyond recognition. This made them have to be careful, be in sort of wooded areas, only come out and do certain things because they were being hunted. That's why the bunched and moving thing that Savoury does, this is emulating how animals would move in the wild if they had to worry about predators. And so when you reintroduce predators like wolves to Yosemite, all of a sudden everything had to run differently. And it wasn't that they just completely wiped out the deer population. They brought it down a bit, but they made them act differently. And this made the rivers banks tighten up, so they weren't flooding, they weren't breaking and so forth. There was much more normal for a good, healthy environment. Beavers came back, other animals came back, birds came back, all these things came back. It changed the entire ecology of Yosemite for the better just by introducing these predators again. And so that's what Savoury is doing. He's trying to reintroduce animals to these areas that have had them driven away, or they've died off, or whatever's happening. And these things that just turn more and more into deserts because the animals are gone now. Now he's reversing that. So he's been doing this for 40 years. He tells people and shows people in his regenerative agriculture sort of settings that they want to do on their farms. He just tells them how to do it, and they do it, and they get reproducible results every single time. So, this guy who made these claims, these grandiose, Galileic sort of claims about Allan Savoury, really didn't have anything to back it up. And, so, yeah, that guy just sort of just pissed me off last week. That's why I'm thinking about it. But
I'm glad it got you going on that rant, because, mate, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll dig into a bit more of the regenerative agriculture topic in the future. That'd be a really good one.
It's very important too, because people talk about, well, we eat meat bowl, but it's not sustainable for everyone to do this because it's so bad for the environment. Like, buddy, the environment includes animals.
Yeah.
And if you only have plants, it's going to wipe out. You need everything. Everything works. It's an economic system. It all works together.
And you know what fertilizer is made out of?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, we get these crops and so forth, and we get the chaff and so forth that we don't use, and we give that as animal feed. And then you get the manure from animal to then grow the crops. And people say, it's like, oh, well, if we weren't growing all these crops just for the cows to eat, we'd have plenty of food for everyone. No, nuts.
You wouldn't have any
93% of the plant material that livestock eat are inedible by humans. Okay. You're talking about the stalks and the plant itself. You have like soybeans. Oh, like soy is grown and all this stuff is grown for a cow. They don't eat the soybeans, dude. They're not eating edamame. They're eating the plant that the edamame grew on. Right. Which I'm sure that you're not eating, and so it's a lie. It's just it's a lie of omission. They're not telling people the whole truth. And so, yes, they are eating soy plants. No, they are not eating soybeans. And so it's very different. Animals are extremely important for the environment, and growing crops, monocropping, strips nutrients out of the soil. It causes harm. You lose topsoil, you lose nutrients, and these things can go barren, and you need to use all these chemicals and fertilizers and so forth just to get anything out of the ground at all. And you have to, slash and burn forests and jungles and so forth. 55% of Borneo's rainforests have been cut down for palm tree oil. To grow, palm oil crops and so forth, killing all the orangutans, killing all the animals. And the vegans will defend this. The environmental vegans will defend this and say, oh, well, actually, we've replaced this with trees. So, I mean, it's like, it's one for one. It's no different. It's like, well, no, actually, it's very different because that's not a habitat. That's not an ecosystem. Maybe there's some birds in there or something like that. There's no orangutans. Anything that comes in there tries to, interrupt that crop gets shot. Okay, so this is not the same thing. And when you take down, they talk about the Amazon rainforest. Oh, it's being taken down to have more room for livestock. Yeah, some of it, most of it is to grow soy and acai berries for your stupid acai bowls. And that's what's happening. And then these fires in the Amazon. This was covered up quite significantly, but it was reported that the actual fires in the Amazon a few years ago, when they said, "Oh, the Amazon rainforest is burning," whatever, which was not the case. NASA actually had satellite images and actually reported that these weren't forest fires, and they certainly weren't being slashed and burned by evil capitalists that are trying to burn down the jungle and then just build up a farm. Like, first of all, you burn down a jungle, you don't just own it now. You burn down this jungle and you just say, yeah, this is my farm now. It's like, there's actually more rules than that. Okay. And the fires were actually these farms that were growing wheat, they were growing these various crops, and they harvested the part of the plant that they could sell and make money on. They sold whatever they could for animal feed, and the rest was extra. And so they burn it. And that's a normal thing in agriculture. You burn down the dead waste that you're not going to use in order to make room for next year's crop or next season's crop. And so that's what was happening. And in fact, NASA looked at their satellite images and said this was actually below average for the yearly fires that we see in the Amazon. And they were all farm burns, controlled burns. And you have to do that when you don't have animals, because normally the animals eat down the dead plants in order to make way for the next season of plant.
We're really creating all these rods for our own back, aren't we, by sort of interfering and getting in the way. I mean, it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, well, it's like these prescription cascades you see in medicine, where a doctor prescribes something, then it has these side effects, or you prescribe something else and it has different side effects, and you keep prescribing, and all of a sudden someone's on 17 different medications, and they just went in with high blood pressure, and it's just like, what the hell's going on?
Oh man.
And so that's part of the problem. You just start screwing with something and you're going to mess it up. complex systems are complex, and you can't just go tinkering around.
A bit like the economy.
Yeah, well, that's it. Just leave it the hell alone and let things
exactly
work.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sorry, it's just that, well, we need intelligent people to micromanage
exactly
the environment and the economy, things like that. And I'm like, buddy, you're just not that smart.
No, you can't predict the trickle down effects of all these different decisions.
Well, yeah, and also just you have individual interactions going on by the billion and every single day. Like you can't account for all of those things. Same thing with the environment. There are billions of interactions between plants and animals, animals and animals, plants and plants, and all the way down the list. All aspects of life and inorganic matter all interact in very, very unique individual ways that you cannot predict fully. You just have to let the system work on its own. This is what's evolved. This is what's happened. And when you start screwing with that, you will mess it up and it will get worse. Try to let nature do its thing, and you're going to be a lot better. And that's what Allan Savoury is doing, trying to emulate nature, trying to emulate how animals work in the wild. And this produces the effects and the benefits in the plant world as well.
All right, let's wrap there. That was awesome.
Sounds good.
So that's why humans are carnivores, guys.
That's it. Yeah, and a history lesson.
And we could keep going as well. But some of the key points that we spoke about was the vital nutrients we need as humans can all be found in animals, but they can't all be found in plants. We can't digest fiber, despite constantly being told to take fiber to help with our digestion or whatever. That's completely made up. Our stomachs are low in pH. They're very acidic, which means that when we were scavenger style animals, we could eat semi-rotten or rotten meat and still get nutrients. We've got a long, small intestine, and we've got a short, large colon, which indicates that we're not made to eat a crap load of plants. And our teeth. Our teeth are designed for an animal, us, who's eating soft meat and fat. And no, we don't go out and kill other animals using our mouths. We have hands and weapons for that. That's why we don't need fangs.
Yeah, exactly. And our appendix. And our appendix is a vestigial organ that used to break down fiber, and now it's useless and it doesn't break down fiber. So then we know that we haven't, been eating fiber for millions of years.
Okay, cool. I don't even have an appendix anymore. So that's how useless they are.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something too that I theorize. You have an appendix, and you have they think you have a fecal lift. There's a piece of feces gets stuck in there, and it gets blocked, and then you have this buildup of bacteria behind it, and it can't get free, and you get this infection. What's that trying to do? You're probably eating a lot of fiber, and this is designed normally to feed load fiber into that little blind pouch called an appendix, which actually gravity will just feed it down, because as your small intestine goes into your cecum, it's sort of like the appendix is straight down from there. So the gravity will just feed it down if you're standing up. And so, you can ostensibly imagine that, it's the introduction of fiber that has actually increased the amount of the cases of appendicitis. Is something that I'd have to look at the numbers for, but I would not be surprised if I found that.
Interesting. Yeah, it could be our fiber consumption that's causing all this appendicitis. Fantastic. All right, Dr. Chaffee, thank you so much. We'll speak again.
No worries, buddy. Good to see you.